And you're the last people in the world to tell anyone else on earth about logic, reason, and sense. Your Western, so-called Enlightenment civilization is a monstrosity in human history. Or you've committed genocide after genocide, and you're committing one right now in Gaza. Your logical, rational, reasonable European powers obliterated the Native Americans. You systematically dehumanized and enslaved Africans for centuries. You carried out population extermination in Namibia, in Congo, in Algeria, and on your own continent against the Jews, the Holocaust, the Gypsies, the Muslims in Bosnia, on and on. You can't talk about rationality and reason. You must be joking. You can only say that if you live inside of your own Western propaganda echo chamber. It's an absurd thing. It's just as absurd as calling yourselves democracies. You created societies that sacralize wealth, that sanctify the rich, giving them near holy authority. You didn't abandon the papal tyranny. You just shifted it into the morality-free private sector. It makes sense to you, in your enlightened logic and reason, that sick people in your societies, for example, can suffer and die if they're poor, and that every human interaction and every human endeavor should be monetized in order for it to have any value, and whatever can be monetized should therefore be socially acceptable and respectable, no matter how deranged and perverse it is.
Hello guys, welcome once again to AfriPost. I hope wherever you are, you're having a great time. Now, Shahid Bolsen has been warming our hearts and really educating us on some of the intricacies that happen within the global power structures. And he's been talking about how Israel has been using its elevated position when it comes to its relations with Western nations to exert violence and oppression among Palestinians. He has talked about many other ways through which Western powers and America have been suppressing and oppressing countries within the global south. How can these countries overcome them? And how can we really work towards gaining our freedom? I want you to listen to this clip of Shahid Bolsen exposing some of these intricacies. Then we shall come back and share our thoughts in the end. Let's watch.
I mean, if we're talking geopolitically, then frankly, Israel is not fighting Hamas. They're fighting reality. You can't really win in that fight. I mean, I can recap basically what I've always said is inevitably going to happen in the Middle East with regards to the Israel-Palestine situation. I've been saying this for a long time. And the more time passes, the fewer people disagree with me. You know, I got a lot of hate at the beginning when I first said this. But that's the thing about being right. People like to take the right position once it becomes obvious that it is the right position. There's really only one way that this can go. There's only one way it can go, and that's de-Zionization of Israel. And their integration into the region, their decoupling from America, and basically a transfer of their dependency to the Gulf. Israel will be absorbed into the corridor of influence along the Mediterranean that's controlled by the GCC and Turkey. The Palestinian territories will eventually be integrated into what is now Israel, in line with a sort of the one-state solution, where the Palestinians are going to eventually be the majority with full citizenship rights, and the whole country is going to be part of that soft empire, that regional collective sovereignty being created by the Gulf states and by Turkey. So there will be an end of the conflict. There will be the elimination of all militancy, the establishment of stability through regional investment and development alongside the A National OCGFC and their investment in development and so on. That's the only way that this can go. And predictably, the elements in Israel who stand to lose the most from this, the Netanyahus, the Ben-Gvirs, and so on, you know, the ideological fanatics, the racists, the genocidal maniacs, they're flailing against this. But they're just no match. They're simply no match for the powers that are driving this transition. What we're witnessing right now in Israel is not Israel pursuing any sort of strategy. It's Israel literally running out of options. It isn't escalation as leverage, it's escalation as habit. You know, the violence in Gaza is no longer about deterrence or control or even security. They can't even make that claim. It's a ritual of dominance that no longer delivers results. It's a compulsion with no rational payoff. They're not advancing any cause by what they're doing. They're broadcasting their irrelevance, and the more irrelevant they become, the more desperate they become. This isn't speculation. The A National Financial Elite, the OCGFC, the A National OCGFC have already recalibrated. They have moved on to advocacy for stability and for infrastructure and integration and development. And Israel, with every missile strike, with every war crime, they're making it harder for them to justify Israel's inclusion in their future. The GCC sees this, BRICS sees this, even the West is beginning to understand that Israel has become a geopolitical liability. So why does Israel continue at all? Well, because the system that created Zionism never included an off switch. It was designed to expand until there was nothing left to take. And when expansion becomes impossible, they can't adapt. They just panic. So what you're seeing now is panic. It's panic, not power. It's not strategic maneuvering on the part of Israel. It's literally their disintegration under the pressure of historical redundancy. The idea that they could empty Gaza of Palestinians, that they could actually erase a people and still walk through the corridors of global legitimacy is absolutely delusional. The world's no longer willing to pretend. Egypt is not going to open the gates. Jordan is not going to comply. No one is going to legalize ethnic cleansing just to make room for Israel's fantasy of demographic supremacy. They don't have the capital, political or financial, to try to force anyone, not anymore. The economic elite who once backed Israel for regional leverage now see greater returns in de-risking the region, not destabilizing the region, de-risking the region. The GCC states are building a future for themselves and for the whole region, and they can't afford to mortgage all of that on a client that no longer follows instructions. I'm talking about Israel. BRICS isn't beholden to Tel Aviv. The OCGFC are restructuring the whole global system, and Israel is rapidly being priced out of relevance. The genocide is not helping them, it's isolating them. It's not strengthening their state, it's hollowing their state out, which just makes them more vulnerable and more susceptible for domination. And the longer this continues, the more irreversible the fallout becomes. They should be able to see it, but they're too ideologically blind, because Zionism doesn't do moderation. It can't pivot to diplomacy or recalibrate its methods. It's a binary system, conquer or collapse. And now that it can't actually conquer, it defaults to collapse. This isn't the end of Gaza. It's the end of Zionist strategy. It has become morally indefensible. It has become economically unviable. It has become diplomatically corrosive and strategically incoherent. It no longer makes any sense in the world. The world has stopped pretending that it does make any sense. This genocide is not going to save Israel. It's not going to protect their security or revive their legitimacy. Quite the opposite. This is only going to mark the final chapter in a doctrine that mistook brutality for authority. But power and authority is much more complex than that. And I don't think anyone in the region has actually understood this better than the GCC. I don't think you understand how much the GCC has been doing just over the last several weeks. Honestly, if you're not aware of this, then you won't have anywhere near an accurate understanding of what's actually happening in the world. But you know, a lot of people, especially even among Muslims, they have either an obsolete understanding of global politics, or they have an insurmountable bias against the Gulf, or else they just can't fathom Muslim countries actually operating with power and autonomy. Like they have such a colonized mind themselves that they imagine only the West can do anything, and our countries are only ever going to be Western lackeys. So they'll actually like literally block out reality just to preserve this programming. But look, the GCC countries have been on an absolute tear recently. Diplomatically, economically, strategically. It's really quite remarkable. And if you're missing out on it, you're really missing out on pivotal events. You know, just this month in Kuala Lumpur, for example. That meeting wasn't symbolic, it was foundational, as in they're building a foundation. Meanwhile, you've got people who don't even know that building is going on. But a whole architecture, political, economic, diplomatic infrastructure is being built right now across the global south, which is going to serve as the foundation for the whole second half of the 21st century. While Western powers are tangled in their own decline, you know, with conflicts, tariffs, debt ceilings, protests, inflation, what have you, the GCC is coordinating inter-regional integration on an unprecedented scale. Like I said, you had that the second annual ASEAN GCC summit in Kuala Lumpur. It was the first ever ASEAN China GCC trilateral summit. Closed door meetings, energy deals, currency frameworks, digital economic pipelines. This is the global south unifying into function. You know, you had Indonesia announcing their alignment with the Saudi peace plan. which is basically the official position of BRICS regarding Israel-Palestine, i.e., normalization with Israel, Indonesia agreeing to normalization with Israel on the condition of Palestinian statehood. And the Saudis have been going across Europe, lining up support for this, lining up support for recognition of a Palestinian state. Spain just recognized Palestine and halted all arms to Israel, banned all ships carrying arms to Israel from docking in Spanish ports. And they made that announcement not just 2 weeks after signing massive investment deals with Saudi Arabia. You think that's a coincidence? No. That's what power looks like when it's played smart, when you use your power correctly. That's investment diplomacy. That's transactional sovereignty building. You know, the GCC recognized that in a Western-dominated world order, money is actually the only thing that counts. The rules of the game are actually incredibly simple when it's that game. And you can't win that game except according to the rules of that game. And the Gulf states have all the resources necessary to do that, and that's what they are doing. I mean, let's be clear. The EU has been deeply divided. 15 out of 27 members still don't recognize Palestine. But now you've got 1.6 billion euros coming from the EU to the Palestinian Authority. France is ready to join the recognition wave by summer 2025. A joint UN conference that's going to be co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France in June. That doesn't happen because of inflammatory emotional rhetoric. That happens because of economic leverage being used wisely, strategically, and cunningly. And the leverage that they have is energy, capital, and access, controlled all by the Gulf. What the GCC is doing is incredibly strategic. They're playing the game extremely well. You know, they sign a deal, they frame the political demand, they co-host the diplomatic theater that everyone needs, and they redirect legal and humanitarian legitimacy back towards Palestine. You know, you might see the headline, France may recognize Palestine, but behind that, there's Saudi investment, there's UAE financing, there's Qatari mediation. This isn't appeasement, this is realignment. They are forcing a realignment on the West. They're not begging the West, they're buying it. That's what the West always did. They always used money to shape policy, but it was policy only for their interests. But now the GCC is doing it better. Palestinian statehood is being packaged inside of investment portfolios. And the West is accepting the terms because they have to. They have no alternative. So to all of the doubters who have always been asking, you know, what's the GCC doing for Palestine? Wake up. This isn't Twitter activism. This is systems level influence. They're rewriting Europe's position one contract at a time. You can't force Europe to act morally. You can't shame them into morality. You can only make immorality too expensive, or anyway, make it less profitable than morality. And you can reward decency with deals. The GCC has figured this out. And now they're exporting justice, the only way that Europe understands, through economic pressure and through economic opportunity. You're watching, if you understand what you're watching the end of the G7 era in real time. Because while America is sanctioning, for example, the GCC is constructing, you know, local currency cooperation, that's de-dollarization in real time. Regional business councils being set up, that's parallel economic governance mechanisms being set up in real time. Food and energy security, that's mutual dependence without imperial extraction. That's collective sovereignty. This isn't diplomacy, this is architecture that they're building. You understand? That's strategic, long game, systemic architecture that they're building. A multipolar financial system, local currencies, fintech, digital payment rails, no IMF, no dollar, no approval needed from Washington. That's what the future looks like. A development corridor from the Arabian Peninsula through Southeast Asia to China, Gulf capital, ASEAN markets, Chinese infrastructure. In other words, a new world system with the West on the outside. They're building a behemoth while you still think Israel has power. I'm sorry, but that's patently absurd. Israel is deteriorating before our eyes. They're building nothing. They're depleting any power that they ever had by the hour. The GCC discussed Gaza at that multilateral summit with ASEAN and China, and that wasn't just virtue signaling. That was a repositioning and a fortification and consolidation of the Palestinian issue into the mainstream of the Global South agenda, where Israel has no control over how that's framed or has no control over the outcome. That's strategic reframing. That's how sovereignty is protected in the 21st century. not by slogans, but by systems. And that's what they're building, systems. You want slogans, you want fiery rhetoric. But meanwhile, they're building infrastructure, they're building systems, they're building architecture. You know, if you're still expecting the future to come from the West, you're facing in the wrong direction. Nothing is happening in the West. The future is being written from the South and from the East, and the Gulf, whether you like it or not, is one of the authors. The GCC isn't just oil anymore. It's not just finance. It's coordination, infrastructure, diplomacy, and control of narrative. If you're not paying attention, you're going to wake up one day realizing that you missed the whole transition. You missed the whole transition completely while you were denigrating and insulting and dismissing the very people who have been driving the transition. So you should take this seriously and you should pay attention. You should pay attention to what the Gulf is doing, but most of you probably don't even know. This is the global pivot. Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah, the Muslim world is right at the center of it. Well, you know, overpraising someone, overpraising anyone, isn't something that we're really supposed to do in Islam. It's not just about the pitfalls of over-idealizing someone, you know, for the person who's doing it, for the person who's doing the praising. I mean, that's obviously a recipe for disappointment, a recipe for disillusionment. But it's also dangerous for the person who's being praised, you know, for a lot of reasons, not just the obvious ones, like giving them a big ego, making them conceited, you know, making them proud and vain and all of that. That's obvious. But of course, the reality is that no one is really as good as you might imagine they are. You know, they obviously do things that they shouldn't, just like anybody else. And it's not really fair to sort of trap them in this impossibly pristine image that you might have of them, you created of them. People have to be allowed to have their flaws and make their mistakes, you know. And if someone's been cast in this sort of perfect ideal with unrealistic standards and so on, then any mistakes that they make are going to be exaggerated and amplified and so forth. If any mistakes that they make get publicized, and fear of those things being publicized is going to make them do all kind of things to try to hide their flaws, just so that they won't get ruined in the public eye. You know, we're not supposed to be like that with each other. We know that everyone does wrong sometimes. You should never be able to blackmail a Muslim, because Muslims all understand that everyone is flawed, everyone is weak in one way or another. So no one should be shocked when you find out something bad about somebody. We've always been more gracious than that. You know, even in the hadiths about the Sahaba, who maybe did some wrong things or committed a sin, their name is hardly ever mentioned. They'll just say, you know, this man or that woman was accused of such and such. They didn't shame them by naming them. They'll never name them. Of course, they knew who they were, but they never say their names. So you actually do wrong to the person that you admire when you put him on a pedestal. You can only safely admire the dead, people who have successfully completed their test in the dunya. And, you know, I think one of the signs has to be, one of the signs of the people who are destined for the hellfire has to be that they do bad and they succeed. You know, they do wrong, they do evil, and somehow everything works out for them. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when God wants you to be good, when it matters to God that you be good, that you do good, well, He'll never let you be good at being bad. In other words, you'll do wrong, you'll do evil, and it will ruin your life. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling you, no, that's not what I want for you. That's not how I want you to be. Those aren't the deeds that I want you to do. And that's the case for most people. For most people, when you act wickedly, it capsizes your life. And that's a mercy. If you're astute enough to understand, to recognize what's going on when that happens. To be punished for what you're doing wrong is a mercy. It's a correction. You know, if you haven't made any repentance for it, and you just keep going on that same wrong path, then it's a mercy to be corrected. See, a lot of good people only became good people because they failed miserably as villains. They might have gone down all sorts of dark paths in their life, over the course of their life. They might have done awful, immoral things. They might have lived an evil lifestyle. Because when I say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't let you be good at being bad, I don't mean that He won't make you capable of being bad. You might be very capable at it. You might be disturbingly capable at it. It might be as bad as they come. But your life also turns into a horrific mess as a result of that. Which means you're not cut out for that life. You're not cut out for that lifestyle. And that's a good thing. See, maybe young people will will look at people my age or older, people who seem to you to be, you know, upright, straight-laced, righteous, what have you, older people, who seem to have themselves together. And you think that they're innocent and pure and good-hearted old senior citizens who never even got so much as a traffic violation in their life. But no, most likely, you're seeing them once they have reached that point after potentially a whole lifetime of wrongdoing and chaos, you understand? You think that they're pure and innocent, but they probably have memories of having done things that you're too young and too innocent to even imagine doing. You know, it's like if you see someone laying on the beach and you think they're just lounging around without a care in the world. They're on vacation or something. They're rich, having a holiday. But in reality, just moments before you got there, they actually just dragged themselves onto the shore after swimming across the ocean and almost drowning. You don't know what you're looking at. You don't know who you're looking at. Listen, when older people warn you about something, you should take it as a given that they're speaking from experience, and you ought to pay attention. Because most of us are nothing but rehabilitated villains, and that's the truth. We didn't necessarily reform ourselves because we, saw the light. No, we didn't see the light. We saw the darkness. And it's not as cool and as satisfying as they make it look in the movies, You know how the bad guys in the movies are always cooler and more interesting and more compelling than the heroes? More compelling and interesting than the good guys in all the movies and TV shows out of Hollywood? Well, that's the epitome of false advertising. Because there's nothing unique about doing wrong. There's nothing unique or special about it. It's not rebellious. It's not liberating. It's not brave. It's mediocre and stupid. And if you go into that sort of lifestyle, the best thing that can happen to you, actually, is for your whole world to fall apart around you. That's the best thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is if your life goes smoothly while you're living an evil lifestyle, because that means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has discarded you and you don't even matter anymore. For men, I don't know about women. I can't speak about women, but for most men, the truth is, most men are bewildered. Life for them is like racing through a maze in the dark, bumping into dead ends, doubling back, trying to find their way, frantic, under pressure, racing against time, all while necessarily acting like they know exactly what they're doing. Necessarily acting confident, necessarily acting assertive and certain and so forth. Even when they haven't got a clue what they're doing. They haven't got a clue where they're going. Or even knowing genuinely what they want to do and where they want to go. Like sharks, They just keep moving to survive. Or anyway, that's what they think they have to do to survive. They think that's what survival requires. And this is actually one of the ways, in my opinion, how and why men become doers of evil. It's almost like they think every opportunity must be taken. Every open door must be accessed. And anything that seems like an accomplishment must be an accomplishment, even if it's bad. It's like someone trying to build a structure, and whatever he finds, he keeps using it as materials. And if he keeps finding materials, he keeps using it, thinking that he's doing something, he's accomplishing something, even if all the materials are faulty and rotten and flimsy. All he knows is, I'm supposed to be building something, so I must be succeeding. I must be doing I must be fulfilling the assignment. So he just takes whatever he can find. He takes whatever he's given. He takes whatever comes to him with no discernment, no discretion, no discrimination, because he can't discern, he can't discriminate, because he doesn't even have a clear understanding of what he's supposed to be building. You understand? So even if haram opportunities come to him, he takes them. Even if haram relationships comes to him, he takes them. He does something wrong, and if he gets away with it, then he does it again. Then he does it again. Then he does worse than that, moving like a blind shark. Hustle, 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 Get money, get women, get fame, get attention, get this, get that. No matter how you do it. Lie, cheat, steal, con, it doesn't matter. And you know that this is all shaitan. This is all from shaitan, and he becomes like shaitan. You know how the jinn are made of fire. And shaitan is a jinn. Well, they're made of fire. And then the man starts acting like fire. He has the same qualities. Volatile, impulsive, wild, out of control. These aren't the qualities of a man. Nabi Adam alayhi salam was from the earth. He was created from the earth, from the clay. Well, clay is solid. It's still. It's stable. It's not volatile. It's adaptable, but it's not volatile. Fire burns and clay cools. It's sturdy. A man should be solid. He should be as solid as the earth itself. But he can't be solid if he doesn't know where he stands. Once he knows where he stands, well, he can't be moved. Well, you'd have a better chance of trying to move a mountain than trying to move a man who knows his place in the world, who has a place to stand. You can't move that man. But if you do see a man who knows where he stands, who knows his place in the world, then you ought to assume that he went through a whole process to get to that point. I mean, you'll hardly ever see a man, an older man anyway, who's upright except that he's someone who has survived his own sins and the consequences of his sins. When you see that old uncle at the front row of the masjid who's always there for the salah, at the front saf, well, he probably knows more about the devil than you know about your own self. Every old righteous man is a combat veteran. I mean, like almost any man my age. Me, myself, I've been all sorts of bad in my life, and I've been good too. Depending on who you are and when you knew me, you might love me or you might hate me, and you'd both be justified, because I've been all sorts of things. But now more than anything else, what I am is experienced. And for me personally, I just want to avoid the stupidity of evil as much as possible, except to point it out when I see it. You know, I get compliments in my comment section. I get praise in my comment section. And I also get a lot of criticism and I get a lot of insults. But I'm impervious to any of those, to both things. Because I know who I am. I know that I'm not as good as anyone thinks I am. And I know that I'm not as bad as anyone thinks I am. But after a decent amount of life experience, you collect a lot of information about both good and evil. And with that information, the least you can do is become a snitch on the devil. You know, just like those mafia guys who cooperate with the feds, who cooperate with the authorities and give them all the inside information about how the mob operates. We understand evil, and we came by that knowledge through experience. See, once you realize the disaster of being evil, not the glamour of it, not the superficial momentary perks, not the rush, but the actual spiritual catastrophe that it is and what it does to your life, well, then you begin to grasp and to appreciate what it means to be good. Not because you became a saint, but because you saw hell peek through your life, the cracks in your life, and you didn't want to fall all the way in. Being good isn't always about noble intentions and having a pure heart. That's the truth. Sometimes being good is just about pure survival. It's about not wanting your life to be a disaster. It's about being sick of the pain that you've caused others and the pain that you've carried within yourself. You don't necessarily always turn to goodness because you think that you're better than others. You turn to goodness because you know you're not better than others, because you remember all too well what it's like to be at your worst. It's not even really about being upright. It's about being mature. It's about being intelligent. And it's about self-respect. And yes, it makes you want to snitch on Iblis. It makes you want to expose his whole operation, you know, with that insider knowledge, to call out Shaitan on all of his strategies and all of his tactics. You know, upright Muslims aren't out here trying to act like they're pious. They're not standing on a pedestal. Most of us are standing on wreckage. We didn't get good, we just got tired. We didn't become saints, we just got smart. We understand that rebellion isn't freedom, indulgence isn't power, defiance isn't dignity. It's not, it's slavery. You're not taking charge of your life when you do wrong. You're forfeiting charge of your life. You're forfeiting control of your life. Like I said, it doesn't make you special. It's a cliche. There's nothing, there's no mediocrity that's more predictable than evil. You know, when you're in that, you think you're a big bad wolf, but you're really a sheep, and your shepherd is Iblis, and he's leading you to the wolves. That's why life experience allows you to speak bluntly, because you've already divorced this dunya, you know, and it was a bad marriage the whole time, and you're glad to be rid of it. And you know, when people get older, you know, I mean, like really older, when death starts moving closer, and it's not a concept, but an appointment that you have. It's not abstract anymore. It's an event that you're packing your bags for, you know. You start letting go of stuff. You know how old people are always giving their stuff away? The older they get, they're giving their stuff away. It's not because they're so spiritually elevated. It's because you realize you're not taking it with you, right? The same thing happens, or should happen, with the worldly desires, with all of your worldly desires and your ambitions and so forth, including your concern about approval and your desire for admiration or your concern over disapproval and what have you. Just like an old man who begins giving away his possessions, his belongings, and he writes his will, you understand he's not being generous, he's just getting ready to leave. Well, that's how you have to start treating your attachments in this life. Give them away. Write your will. Get your soul in order. Get your affairs in order. Because you can't be free until all the temptations of this dunya become dull and bland and boring to you, unappealing. So that Shaitan has to be able to look at you and not see any buttons he can push. Then you can't be bribed, you can't be blackmailed, you can't be threatened, you can't be coerced, you can't be paid off, because the dunya has nothing that you want. You don't need approval and you don't fear disapproval. This will solidify you. This will make you still and settled and you'll have your place to stand. So, if you have done wrong in your life, or if you're doing wrong, if you've been making the shayateen your friend group, okay, then be disloyal, I'm saying. Be a traitor, be a mafia snitch, turn on him, be a whistleblower, be a security breach in his system of evil. Teach your brothers and sisters about his manipulation and how it works so that they won't fall for it. Maybe this is how you can turn your evil deeds into good deeds. Literally by taking the knowledge that you acquired only by doing the evil deeds, and then using that to teach others what a disaster it is. And then maybe, if you're fortunate, maybe, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, when the judgment day comes, you'll break even. And that's as good as a win.
So, welcome back again to the channel. I'm happy you've stayed till this end. Shahid Bolsen, an American-born commentator and activist, has become known for his sharp critique of Western imperialism, capitalism, and Israel policy in Middle East. His criticism of Israel are rooted in a broader ideological framework that views Zionism as an extension of Western colonialism. Bolsen argues that Israel functions not merely as a national state, but as a militarized outpost of Western power, enforcing geopolitical hegemony in the region on behalf of Euro-American interests. He condemns the occupation of Palestinian territories and the systemic dehumanization of Palestinians, framing the conflict as emblematic of a global pattern of Western domination over non-Western peoples. Bolsen's critique extends beyond Israel to encompass the overarching structures of Western capitalism and neoliberal governance. He asserts that global financial institutions, multinational corporations, and international political alliances, such as NATO, work in tandem to maintain economic dependency and political subordination in the global south. According to Bolsen, these systems exploit labor, extract resources, and dismantle local governance in favor of corporate and elite interests. He views Western democracy as a facade that legitimizes inequality, and he frequently points to military interventions, economic sanctions, and regime changes as evidence of neo-imperial strategy to suppress self-determination in developing nations. In response to what he sees as Eurocentric tyranny, Bolsen advocates for a strategic realignment of the global south based on moral economy, local sovereignty, and Islamic principles of governance. He proposes that nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America reject dependence on Western aid and financial systems like the IMF and World Bank. Instead, he calls for the creation of alternative economic and political alliances grounded in mutual respect, resource sharing, and cultural sovereignty. He often references models like South-South cooperation and emerging geopolitical blocs like BRICS as potential counterweights to Western dominance. Bolsen emphasizes the importance of ideological independence, arguing that true liberation must come not only through economic reforms, but also through a rejection of Western cultural and epistemological frameworks. However, Bolsen's proposals are not without controversy. His past advocacy of targeting corporate infrastructure and use of incendiary language have drawn criticism and scrutiny, with some accusing him of encouraging violence. Despite this, his broader message resonates with many who seek a decolonized world order and greater autonomy for the global south. His critiques taps into a deep well of frustration with global inequality and Western double standards, particularly among younger activists and intellectuals. In essence, Bolsen's vision calls for a dismantling of the current geopolitical hierarchy and the building of a new multipolar system where the global south is not just a passive recipient of development, but an active shaper of its own future. You can share your opinion down in the comment section. And if you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel because we have greater content coming your way. Thank you, and let's meet on the next one.